We could certainly talk about Martin Luther as the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, but again, there is a similar desire for reform or perhaps for a break from the Roman Catholic Church that follows on the work of Luther in other parts of Europe, especially in what we would call Western Europe. In this video, I want to focus on what we call the English Reformation, the Reformation that occurs within England. And this is more of a top-down Reformation. It's not about village by village or territory by territory determining to break from the Roman Catholic Church. That might be more the model that we see in portions of Germany and portions of, for example, Switzerland with the Reformed tradition. But here, this is more of a top-down approach, largely based on the leadership of King Henry VIII, who was King of England during the time of the Reformation in the 16th century. And here we're really focused on the 1520s and into the 1530s and beyond, where King Henry is ruling. King Henry VIII is an interesting figure. We often think about his many wives. There was even a little mini-series that was on at one point about the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And that does factor into the English Reformation because King Henry VIII, like most kings throughout history, wanted a male heir to the throne, a baby boy. He was initially married to Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella from Spain. And we know of Ferdinand and Isabella in part because they were in charge of Spain when Christopher Columbus was sent over and eventually discovered what was called the New World. So Catherine of Aragon is married to Henry VIII. She was originally married to Henry VIII's older brother, and he would have been the one to become the king after their father died. His name was Arthur, and Catherine was married to him when they were both just teenagers at a very young age, partly to secure the alliance between Spain and England, perhaps against France, which had been kind of an enemy of both sides at certain times throughout the recent history. So Henry's older brother dies, and it is eventually decided that Catherine will simply now marry Henry, the younger brother. And this happens, and eventually Henry VII does die, and Henry VIII becomes King of England with Catherine as his queen. Unfortunately, Catherine is not able to produce a baby boy who survives infancy. She has several miscarriages. The one child that does survive and is healthy is a daughter. She is named Mary. And yet, when it becomes a little bit clearer that Catherine is going to be unable to produce a male heir, Henry VIII has also already fallen in love with another woman. And he is interested in actually getting his marriage to Catherine annulled so that he can then be free to marry this other woman who might be able to produce that baby boy. He's also become very troubled because he came across a passage in Leviticus which suggested that one should not marry the widow of one's brother. Now, there are other passages that almost seem to suggest the exact opposite, but Henry came to believe that he was really cursed by God, and that's why he could not have a baby boy, because he married his brother's widow. So this is a really interesting kind of intrigue within the palace, and Henry is often bringing in people, especially theologians and church leaders, who might support his desire to get his marriage annulled, because it's not going to be easy. After all, Catherine is the aunt of Charles V, and we mentioned him back at the Diet of Worms. He was the Holy Roman Emperor, and he is the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. So Catherine obviously has a little bit of connection here with a very important political leader in Europe. And for that reason, Charles V doesn't want to see the annulment because it would bring shame on his family and on his aunt, Catherine, in England. He is able to then exert pressure over the Pope and over the Catholic Church to perhaps reject Henry's desire for an annulment. Eventually, Henry really becomes reliant on one primary figure, and his name is Thomas Cranmer. And Cranmer is eventually named by Henry as the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he is accepted as the Archbishop of Canterbury by the Vatican, by the Pope, and the Roman Catholic Church. Remember, at this time, Everything in England is Catholic, just like everything in Germany was Catholic before Lutheran churches started to pull away based on the theology of Luther and the protection of key political figures like Prince Frederick. So everyone is Catholic. Cranmer is accepted as an Archbishop of Canterbury, which was really one of the two leading religious figures within England. There were two archbishops of the two provinces within the English Catholic Church. But Cranmer was very supportive of Henry in his desire for an annulment from Catherine so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. And Cranmer was also very intrigued by what was happening in Germany among the Lutheran churches. He had actually visited that region and he had seen what was going on. And theologically, he became really supportive of Luther's theology, much of it, and also some of the desire to break from the Roman Catholic Church. So eventually, Cranmer is the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he is supporting Henry's desire for an annulment. When it becomes clear that the Catholic Church is not going to grant the annulment, Henry and Thomas work together in order to get popular support among the politicians within England to actually pass a bill that will ultimately break all ties between England and Rome. There's another bill passed earlier on which says that if the annulment is granted by Thomas Cranmer as the Archbishop of Canterbury, that Catherine cannot appeal the decision to the Pope. And in some ways, even that bill was showing the break between England and Rome, because the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church centered in Rome was no longer going to have authority over decisions that were made by the English. But eventually, the major bill is the English Act of Supremacy. And with this act that is passed through Parliament, King Henry VIII himself is seen as the supreme head of the Church of England. It is no longer the Pope, but it is the monarch, the king or the queen of England, that is seen as the head of the church. Obviously, there are then the religious leaders, most notably the Archbishop of Canterbury, that will be in charge of church decisions. But the king is ultimately the head of the church, and this officially cut ties between England and Rome. So basically, once these bills were passed through, it's an overnight kind of reformation, because every church in England had been affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church and had been under the submission of the Roman Catholic Church. And after these bills are passed, that simply isn't the case. Now, certainly there are people and there are priests and there are bishops who don't like what is going on and want to rejoin and reunify with the Roman Catholic Church. But under the leadership of King Henry VIII and under the church leadership of Thomas Cranmer, that is not going to happen for many, many years. Even after King Henry VIII dies, the church remains independent from the Roman Catholic Church. It is referred to simply as the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. With Henry's son, he eventually is able to have a son, and the son is able to take over control. The church even reforms itself more in the direction of some of the continental Reformation movements, like the Lutheran movement, like the Reformed movement in and around Switzerland. Eventually, through a lot of political intrigue, Mary, the daughter of Catherine, is able to take the throne of England, and she becomes a queen, and she does reunite the English church with the Roman Catholic Church. But once her reign is over and Queen Elizabeth I takes over, we go back to an independent Anglican church. And that exists to this day. And to this day, the monarch is given the title of the head of the Church of England. So Queen Elizabeth II is considered the head of the Church of England. When William and Kate had their first baby boy, and the guy comes out of the hospital and reads from that scroll all of the future titles to be given to that baby boy, one of those titles is future head of the Church of England. So there is still the state church, the Anglican Church in England. Eventually, however, the Anglican Church, through missionary work and through migration, spreads around the world. And there are now many, many provinces of the Anglican Communion throughout the world. That's what it's called, the Anglican Communion. So there is a province of Anglicanism, for example, historically in the United States and in Canada, and it is referred to as the Episcopalian Church. So if you've heard of the Episcopalian churches, those are simply churches that are part of the worldwide Anglican communion, but that exist in the United States and in North America. More recently, we have seen more conservative Episcopalians decide to leave the Episcopal Church and want to remain part of the Anglican communion. And therefore, we have seen now other Anglican churches represented in America, even though they are not part of the Episcopalian province. So there's a lot of still mess and complexity within Anglicanism worldwide, but Anglicanism itself traces all the way back to the 1520s and 1530s when Henry VIII and his Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, eventually cut all ties with Rome so that the English church was going to be now part of that larger Protestant Reformation. In terms of church practice, the Anglican Church always tended to stay a little bit closer to Catholicism than some of the other Protestant movements. And it would go through different waves where it would become closer to Catholics in terms of practice and perhaps some beliefs, and then further removed from Catholicism. And Anglicanism historically went through those different ebbs and flows until a kind of balance was sort of reached. But even to this day, you still have that tension of Anglicans who want the church not to rejoin the Roman Catholic tradition, but to perhaps move toward that tradition in terms of beliefs and practices, and those who want to move further away from that tradition in terms of beliefs and practices. So we can think about the Anglican Church as kind of a second major establishment church of the Protestant Reformation, following the Lutheran churches in and around Germany and further up into the Scandinavian nations.